You are listening to American Ambassadors Live, the podcast on international affairs sponsored by the Council of American Ambassadors in Washington, D.C. The Council is the association of non-career U.S. ambassadors who have represented America under presidents from John F. Kennedy through Donald Trump.
Our guest for today's podcast is Ambassador Nina Hachigian. She is the first U.S. Special Representative for City and State Diplomacy. Previously, she served as First Deputy Mayor for International Affairs of Los Angeles and as a U.S. Ambassador to the Association of Southeastern European Nations. She's a respected author and expert on U.S.-Asian relations. You're a busy person, Ambassador. Thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Why don't we start by telling us, what does the U.S. Representative for City and State Governments do?
Well, that's a big question, but let me first, just for the benefit of your audience who might be more familiar with, nation-to-nation diplomacy, just step back and describe what subnational diplomacy is. I'm not a fan of that term. I think it's a little wonky, but it is the term of art, within the State Department and within the, think tanks and world of academics. So it refers to the official interactions by elected leaders of cities, states, counties, regions across international borders. So that could be city to city, it could be state to nation, it could be city to nation, et cetera. MOUs are signed, cooperation happens, delegations visit, international events are hosted, et cetera. So what we do, and my title is the Special Representative for City and State Diplomacy, which I think is slightly easier to understand. We work with U.S. states, counties, cities, towns, and collections of those elected leaders, and we do two primary things. So first, we support them in their international engagements that they have decided are important for their constituents. We encourage them to act internationally, and then we bring the bring the expertise and the programs that are available at the State Department directly to them. And then on the other hand, we work with our colleagues all over the world and embassies everywhere when they want to either connect with their own local elected officials, and we encourage them to do that, or they want to pay a visit themselves, or local elected officials they work with to our local elected officials.
Let me ask you a question, because I think, as you know, I'm a state senator in Maryland. Yeah. And I think most people, at least in state and local government that I'm aware of, or outside state and local government in the United States, would think of the two major engagements of state and local governments internationally would be sister state relationships, sister city relationships, and trade missions. Are those the big two, or are they two of the big five? What are the major areas of interaction that you have dealt with?
Yeah, I would say those are, I would say for an average city in the United States, that's probably right, and an average state. But then there are some that, do all kinds of other things. So, for example, they choose to cooperate with another country or city on a particular issue that's relevant to both of them. So, for example, the mayor of Hoboken, Hoboken experienced terrible flooding, I want to say about 10 years ago, and that mayor has been working with the government of Netherlands to figure out what kind of flood protection technology they have that he can employ. So that's best practice sharing is the term for that, and it's absolute magic when it happens well. Another example is when I was in LA city government, our mayor had taken a trip to Mexico City. Claudia Sheinbaum was the mayor at that time. She's now the president of Mexico. And he witnessed their earthquake early warning system and decided that's something that LA really needed. So we worked with the U.S. Geological Survey and eventually created an app to give residents of LA a couple seconds warning before an earthquake happened. And then the state of California adopted that technology. So that was one visit of one mayor one time, and now 40 some million people are ever so slightly safer from earthquakes.
That's a great example. Do you find that you have more cities and states coming to you for help than you have capacity? Or are you out there spreading the word and encouraging them to do stuff they're not doing?
I think we're just tipping the corner of that actual in that way. So for the first, year or so, we were just doing everything we could to make. I mean, we were still answering questions and
This is
helping,
the new
but
office, right? You're
right, but
first
nobody
one.
knew that this existed.
Well, that's
So
important, though.
so we spent a lot of time working through associations just to let people know that we were out there. And now I would say that it's a small team. But the best compliment anyone's ever paid me, there was a write-up or an op-ed in Forbes magazine a couple of weeks ago where they said we were something along the lines of like a paragon of government efficiency, and we were nimble and all that, which is all. I mean, we really are nimble. We are try to be very responsive. We think of states and cities and counties as our clients. So I think we manage. There's always more that I would love to do and could do that I think would be beneficial, but we're okay.
How do you relate to the other departments of the federal government? I know when I was ambassador, the agriculture was very involved in Romania.
Mhm.
The energy department was very involved. How do you, because obviously they deal with state and local governments a lot. So what's the interaction with the other federal agencies? And obviously the housing and urban development, they're about cities. So
Yeah.
how do they fit into this picture with the U.S. government helping cities?
Yeah, we coordinate with them pretty regularly on specific areas that they cover. So, for example, when APEC was the year that we hosted APEC,
What is APEC?
in 2020, sorry, the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation,
Yep.
which is a group of leaders in the Pacific Rim who together work on policy that will stimulate trade and investment and better connectivity economically. So we hosted that gathering of nations in 2023, and we created an event in Detroit that was focused on EV financing. And we did that with the Department of Transportation.
You mean electronic vehicle?
Electronic vehicle
Mhm.
financing, and how that is done at the local level or could be done at the local level. So that was something we did with the Department of Transportation, and we've worked on, with the Department of Energy and had, conversations with agriculture and work with HUD, the Housing and Urban Development, because they are the ones who do, they are the representatives of the United States to some gatherings, official gatherings under the UN umbrella of cities.
Gotcha. And so you're the first special representative in this position, I understand.
I am. There was, I was reading this article by a Spanish researcher about U.S. subnational diplomacy, and learned that there was some kind of a function back under the days of the Carter administration, actually, God rest his soul. And then also there was something kind of similar as well under Secretary Clinton when she was Secretary of State. But this is a sort of more robust version, and it's the first official unit in the State Department.
You mentioned the subnational lingo, and as a state senator, the notion of states being subnational is a little odd, given that we call it the United States of America, because the states were the ones who created the federal government. But
Fair enough. And this is why I try to avoid the term when I'm not in, in general, honestly, but it's the term of art. And
I
I
understand.
remember once meeting with, Mayor Landrieu when
Huh?
he was at the White House, and he was like, we're not sub,
Amen.
which is of course what of course I agree with that. I
Understand.
have the utmost respect for mayors and governors and the really difficult jobs they have.
Well, I understand. Well, particularly when we have when you talk about climate change and we have difficult weather situations, generally they don't call the president; they generally call the mayor. So
Absolutely. And that's true of transnational threats in general, which is part of why that makes sense to create this office. But when you think about COVID, you think about extreme weather or fentanyl or cyber attacks, like those are all happening in places where the local leaders have to respond. And they have valuable information for the federal government about how best to do that. And so, we've had great conversations on fentanyl, for example, which was a real priority for the Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken. So we had our top negotiators on those topics meeting with local leaders who know this scourge intimately and know the trends that they're seeing and have created various kinds of interventions to help at the local level. But they were really unaware of what we had been doing, creating this global coalition of countries on synthetic opioids and pushing China to prevent the export of precursors that go to Mexico. And we were unaware of all the interventions they were doing. So it was a really great conversation that married the two sides of this transnational threat, and that's true of the others as well.
makes sense. Well, that leads into my next question: is why is this important, and why should the United States, the State Department in particular, but the United States government in general, and state and local governments themselves, be more engaged internationally?
Yeah, so I think that it's so let's think of it from both sides. So from the point of view of a local elected leader, like they reach out internationally because they want to attract jobs, attract attention to what they're doing in their cities. They want to learn solutions from other cities. They want to have a cultural connection, maybe based on their diaspora. This one mayor told me that he went to visit a country where much of his population is from, because he said people bring their places with them, and he wouldn't be able to really serve them without understanding their culture. So those are some of the reasons why a local official might decide that they want to engage internationally. But the reason some of the reasons that it's useful for us is
Us meaning the federal government?
us meaning the federal government, meaning the State Department,
Uh-huh.
is that first, as I was sort of alluding to earlier, local leaders can help us with their expertise, with their action, and with their implementation in a variety of areas. So of course, we also care about job creation. So they're important actors on that front, because foreign direct investment has to happen in a place. And we can talk more about that because we've done some cool things there. They can be important actors on climate, which is another Biden administration priority, because they're the ones who make the decisions about procuring electric school buses that are, healthier for kids and also reduce carbon, or what kind of power they're going to supply to their residents, or how they're going to conserve water, for example. So that's another that's one piece. They can also enhance bilateral ties. the very, practical, non-ideological conversations that local leaders have is very well received. And it goes both ways. So the UK, Germany, and others have cultivated ties with the United States. But we've also, so for example, one of the deputies, secretaries of state, led a delegation that we put together with 8 mayors and state officials that we took to Armenia last summer, to have conversations about what it means to be a local leader in a democracy, because it's a very new democracy. The administration was focusing attention on Armenia for a variety of reasons. And so we were able to kind of enhance that relationship with these ties that are ongoing. And when you think about all of our close allies, there's many, many ties that happen at that local level. Another reason is that we're able to focus attention on the space that our competitors and our adversaries are exploiting. So domestically, the PRC takes advantage of kind of our decentralized political system, PRC, People's Republic of China, to gain influence and to have its view of the relationship prevail when it is, stymied in Washington. So we work with the experts in the State Department on China to brief our local officials about that relationship and offer them ways to reduce risks. So we never ever tell them what to do, but we suggest that there are things to look out for. And most of the time, this is, fine cooperation, but some of the time, and you can read about it in the newspapers, it can lead to co-option of local officials in a way that's not that we don't appreciate. And on that score, that kind of strategic use of local local relationships, we're having a symposium actually next week with our close allies at the local level to share experiences and see what they are also learning and what best practices can be. Local action can also support multilateral diplomacy, such as the Summit of the Americas, which is a big gathering of Western Hemisphere countries that we hosted 2 years ago. And we created the first Cities Summit of the Americas in Denver in April of 2023. And that brought together 250 or so mayors, thousands of people. And that is, increasing of our ties in Latin America. It's, we launched a program to have pairs of U.S. and a Latin American city and Caribbean cities pair up to create sustainable development plans. And we've then released a finance guide for Latin American cities on how to finance those plans. And at that same event, the Secretary of State was there, and he met with then Mayor of Mexico City, Claudia Sheinbaum, who's now the president, and another mayor there is the VP-elect of Uruguay, Carolina Cose, and there's others who I think will eventually run for national office as well. So that's the final reason I would say that it's useful for the State Department is we get to meet these
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
These leaders earlier in their careers.
Let me come back to what you're saying about China. Is to what extent is China doing things that we, the U.S. government, don't want them to do with state and local governments in the United States? That's question number one. And question number two is, are there other actors like China doing that, like Russia, for example, or others, or is China kind of unique in that regard?
To what extent is a difficult question to answer. So we know that the term of art in the State Department is malign foreign influence. So we know that happens. It is hard to know the magnitude because it's the cases that we hear about are ones where there are arrests involved typically, and that is only a probably small portion of of the instances. There was, for example, a mayor from California who we had reached out to, but who didn't respond to us. And he was invited on an all expenses paid trip to Xinjiang, which is the part of China where the Uyghurs are being imprisoned, which is some major human rights violations that happen there. And he recorded a video about how great Xinjiang was. And, he just didn't have the context. Mayors and governors and county officials, they have tiny budgets in general, and they definitely usually don't have budgets to do international work. And so, a free trip to China sounds pretty good if you aren't looking kind of at the source and how it's going to be used and all that. So
that's a strategic part of what your office does and State Department is doing, is trying to stay ahead of that and help local elected officials kind of have the context.
Yes, exactly. And in terms of Russia and Iran, we have not heard of cases in the US, but there are organizations, that gather groups of global organizations that gather groups of global mayors and governors. And there's the biggest one of those is called United Cities and Local Governments, based in Barcelona. And there are 3 countries that don't send local officials there, and that's Libya, Yemen, and the United States. And
are we having a trilateral offsite with them? What is going on?
No, it's we're new to local diplomacy. This is relatively new, and we do not fund our local governments in a way that allows them to take part in things like this. And we're just now at the national level figuring out that this is really important. So I hope a solution will be forthcoming, but they first need to pay dues in order to join. And, no mayor or governor is going to, use taxpayer dollars to pay dues to a Barcelona-based organization. It's very unlikely to happen. Maybe some of them will, and I would appreciate it if they did, but it's unlikely.
Do other countries pay that at the national level?
I don't know. It's possible that some do. And it's also possible that they are just better resourced at the local level for things like this. But anyway, these folks have meetings all over the place, and definitely the Iranians are there, and the Russians are there, and the Chinese are there. And
we're not.
And we're not. And the Europeans would like us to be there. All of North America is being represented by a small Canadian city. And that mayor's lovely and experienced, but it's as a diplomat, it drives me slightly crazy that there aren't U.S. voices in those conversations, because they talk about Ukraine, they talk about issues of real importance to the United States, and they also have a very robust best practice sharing arrangements as well, which are and our mayors are not getting the benefit of that.
Is that just cities, or is that states too? And
pardon? It is. I'm not sure, to be honest, because I don't know exactly how they define. I know there are governors that go there, but I don't know if it's, to what degree our governors would be the representatives, or if it's our cities. I think they're very also eager as an institution to have the United States participate. So I don't think they would be too choosy.
Gotcha. Well, that raises the third question, is sort of how do we compare to other countries? And it sounds like we're not in the lead. We're trying to catch up.
Yeah, I'd say that's right. I mean, it's a kind of a paradox. We're a giant country, it turns out, and we have a lot of cities and states. And so this organization, the Truman Center, has done an interactive map of all the international engagements that they've been able to track down. And when you look at that map, it looks like a lot of activity, but it really isn't for a nation of our size. And it's really a question of resources. So we've started a program called the Lewis Local Diplomat Program, where we will second a foreign service officer or a civil service officer to a state or local government for a year to be the international advisors for the governor or for the mayor. And we've got a few in the field now, and we'll have more in the field next summer. And so that it's a drop in the bucket, but it's still helpful. And so they provide all kinds of advice and connectivity back to the State Department, and are very aware of all the, things that the State Department can offer a local government, all the student exchanges. And then we've just started, I mentioned that I referred to this earlier, but we've started giving for free local officials a snapshot of their current foreign direct investment, which enables them to then pursue certain countries that are already invested, or certain industries that are already invested. So we can do that. And that's never before been available from the federal government.
No, it's great.
Commerce tracks data at the state level, but we're now able to do this at the county and city level as well. And we're able to, give states certain pieces of the data in a way that is useful. So if they want to know all the trade that they had with, or all the, investment that comes from Ireland, like we can track that down, for example. So anyway, yeah, these diplomats is part of the solution, but only it's a baby step part of the solution, I would say. I mean, European mayors and provincial and regional leaders are very, very active internationally. Many Latin American cities are, and Asian, and some African, what they have is a budget to do things and staff expertise. So Shanghai, for example, has 100 people who do nothing but international relations for the city of Shanghai. New York has around 10, LA has around 10, and then there's maybe 4 other cities that have anybody, and then most people have nobody. Most cities, most people.
College Park, where I live, has nobody. College Park, where I live, has nobody. So I understand.
Right, and then most states also don't have. They might have like one person in the economic, part, but they don't have someone who's doing protocol or diplomacy, or, or kind of actively developing a strategy. There are a few exceptions to that. Governor of Indiana, super active, though the outgoing, super active internationally. California is pretty active internationally. Utah is, but many states, just are not super active internationally.
Let me ask you one final question, because I certainly noticed when I was in Romania that Europeans all know other Europeans. It's quite amazing.
Yeah.
And when you put them all together, they're as big as the United States, or bigger depending on how you count it, and they speak different languages. So you would think it would be easier here than it is there. But I think my answer to that is they're motivated to, because they live close to each other, and they've had a couple of centuries of deadly wars and conflict, and so they get it about knowing people and getting along with people is like a big deal.
Yeah, it's also, though, that, I mean, so 2 thoughts about that. The European Union and its various instruments have funded the ability of those local leaders to all know each other. So, hundreds of millions of dollars have gone into that, right? And we've never done that. And also, I think for most local officials, like if they want to learn about something, they just go next door to the next door state, or to another state that they know, and they ask them how they're doing something. So they don't have the drive on, they have resources here that they can call upon. But it's it's a small world, and we, I think, as a country, do lose out on innovation and ideas, but also foreign direct investment and even like cultural experiences when we aren't acting internationally at the local level.
Ambassador, thank you for joining us today. And thank you for filling us in on what you've been doing and what the United States government's committed to in terms of expanding relationships between state and local governments in the United States and around the world. I was interested to hear the positive side. I kind of knew about. Your point on the negative side in terms of what China and other people are trying to do, I think is very important for national security. So I think folks will be interested in that. So keep up the good work.
Thanks so much, Ambassador. Great to talk.
This has been the American Ambassadors Live podcast. To hear more from us, subscribe to the American Ambassadors Live podcast and leave us a review. Tweet us your thoughts on this week's episode and tag us at AMER Ambassadors using the hashtag AmbassadorsLive.